On a cool January morning in 2007, a man walked onto a stage in San Francisco. He was dressed in his signature uniform involving New Balance sneakers, blue jeans, and a black turtleneck. He looked out at the audience and told them that every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. He said he was introducing 3 revolutionary products that day. The first was a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second was a revolutionary mobile phone. The third was a breakthrough internet communicator. The crowd cheered for each one. Then he paused, smiled, and repeated the list. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone, are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices, he said. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. That moment was the pinnacle of a career that had reshaped not just technology, but the way human beings interact with the world. But the path to that stage was not a straight line of success. It was a turbulent, heartbreaking, and ultimately redemptive journey that began with a boy who felt abandoned. To understand the legend of Steve Jobs, we have to go back long before the iPhone, back before the Macintosh, to a garage in Los Altos, California. The story really begins in 1955. Steve was born to 2 graduate students who felt they were too young and struggled to keep him. He was put up for adoption. This fact, that he was given away, became a fundamental driver in his psychology. He was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple. Paul was a machinist who knew how to build things with his hands. He taught Steve a lesson that would stick with him forever. He told Steve that when you are building a cabinet, you have to make the back of the cabinet as beautiful as the front, even though no one will see it. You do it because you know it is there. This obsession with hidden quality, with perfection for the sake of perfection, became the DNA of everything Steve Jobs would later touch. Growing up in what would later become Silicon Valley, Steve was surrounded by engineers and the burgeoning world of electronics. He was brilliant, restless, and often difficult. But his life changed when he met a shy, bearded electronics genius named Steve Wozniak. Wozniak was the technical wizard, the guy who could solder circuits and make computers do things no one thought possible. Jobs was not an engineer in the traditional sense. He did not code, and he did not design circuits. But he saw the future. Where Wozniak saw a fun hobby, Jobs saw a revolution. In 1976, inside the Jobs family garage, they started Apple Computer. To get the startup capital, Jobs sold his Volkswagen bus and Wozniak sold his scientific calculator. They were all in. Their first product, the Apple I, was just a circuit board. But their second product, the Apple II, was a masterpiece. It was the first computer that looked like a consumer appliance, not a piece of military equipment. It had color graphics and a plastic case. It made Apple a household name. By the time Steve Jobs was 25 years old, he was worth over $100 million. He was the prince of the technology world, young, rich, and famous. But success brought arrogance. Steve was demanding, abrasive, and often cruel to the people who worked for him. He believed he was an artist, and he treated his team with a mix of inspiration and terror. As Apple grew, it needed adult supervision. Steve recruited John Sculley, the CEO of Pepsi, to run Apple. He famously asked Sculley if he wanted to sell sugar water for the rest of his life or if he wanted to come with him and change the world. Sculley chose to change the world, but that decision would eventually tear Steve's world apart. In the early 80s, Steve became obsessed with a new project called the Macintosh. He had seen a graphical user interface at a Xerox research center, a system where you used a mouse to click on icons. He knew immediately that this was the future of computing. He assembled a pirate team within Apple to build the Mac. They worked insane hours, fueled by Steve's reality distortion field, a term they used to describe his ability to convince you that the impossible was actually possible just by the force of his will. When the Macintosh launched in 1984, it was hailed as a breakthrough. It said hello to the world. But it was expensive and underpowered. Sales slowed down. The relationship between Steve Jobs and John Sculley deteriorated into open warfare. The board of directors had to choose between the experienced executive and the volatile founder. They chose Sculley. In 1985, Steve Jobs was fired from the company he created. He was 30 years old, and he was publicly humiliated. He later said it was like being punched in the stomach and having the wind knocked out of him. He felt his life was over. But this exile turned out to be the most important period of his life. It was the fire that forged his maturity. He didn't retire. He started a new computer company called Next, aimed at the education market. The computers were beautiful black cubes, technologically advanced, but far too expensive. They failed commercially. However, the software inside them was brilliant. During this time, Steve also bought a small computer graphics division from George Lucas for $5 million. He called it Pixar. For years, Pixar bled money. Steve kept writing checks to keep it alive because he believed in the vision of computer-animated storytelling. That belief paid off when Pixar released Toy Story. It was a massive hit, and when Pixar went public, Steve Jobs became a billionaire again. But more importantly, working with the creative geniuses at Pixar taught him how to manage creative talent. He learned patience. He learned that he didn't always have to be the smartest person in the room. Meanwhile, back at Apple, things were falling apart. Without Steve, the company had lost its soul. They were releasing dozens of confusing products, profits were vanishing, and by 1996, Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy. They desperately needed a new operating system. They looked around the industry and decided to buy Next, Steve's failing computer company, for its software. In a twist of fate that seems like it was written for a movie, Apple bought Next, and Steve Jobs walked back into the lobby of the headquarters in Cupertino. He was initially just an advisor. But he quickly looked around and saw a company in chaos. He staged a boardroom coup and was named the interim CEO. People started calling him the ICEO. He took a salary of $1 a year. The company was 90 days away from insolvency. Steve went to work with a machete. He looked at the product roadmap, which was filled with printers, scanners, and dozens of different Macintosh models. He drew a simple grid on a whiteboard. 2 columns, 2 rows. Consumer and Pro. Desktop and portable. He told his team that they were going to kill everything else and focus on making just 4 great products. This was the turning point. He slashed 70% of the hardware and software projects. He laid off thousands of people. It was painful, but it saved the ship. He launched the Think Different marketing campaign, featuring images of Einstein, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. It was a signal to the world that Apple was returning to its roots of innovation and rebellion. Then came the iMac. It was translucent, blue, and friendly. It didn't look like a computer, it looked like something from the future. It was a massive hit. Apple was back. But Steve wasn't done. He had a vision of the digital hub, where the computer would be the center of your digital life. He realized that the music industry was broken. People were stealing music on Napster or carrying around bulky CD players. He introduced the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket. It wasn't the first MP3 player, but it was the most beautiful and the easiest to use. Combined with the iTunes Store, it revolutionized how the world bought and listened to music. Apple transformed from a computer company into a consumer electronics powerhouse. Then came the iPhone in 2007. It destroyed the dominance of BlackBerry and Nokia almost overnight. It put the internet in our pockets. It created the App Store economy. It changed how we take photos, how we navigate, and how we communicate. 3 years later, he launched the iPad, creating a whole new category of devices between the phone and the laptop. Throughout this golden era, Steve was fighting a private battle. In 2003, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. For a long time, he tried to treat it with diet and alternative medicine, a decision he later regretted. As he grew thinner and frilier, his creative output seemed to accelerate. He knew his time was limited. In 2005, he stood before the graduating class at Stanford University and gave one of the most famous speeches in history. He told 3 stories. He spoke about connecting the dots, about love and loss, and about death. He told the students that remembering you are going to die is the best way to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. He urged them to stay hungry and stay foolish. By 2011, the cancer had spread. Steve resigned as CEO, handing the reins to Tim Cook, the operational genius he had hired years earlier. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at his home in Palo Alto, surrounded by his family. The reaction was global and immediate. People around the world lit candles outside Apple stores. They used their iPhones and iPads to write tributes to the men who had created them. The legacy of Steve Jobs is not just in the devices we use every day. It is in the philosophy he instilled in the world. He taught us that technology should not be cold and intimidating, it should be beautiful and intuitive. He proved that design is not just how something looks, but how it works. He showed that one person, with enough passion and enough refusal to accept the status quo, can truly change the world. He was a complicated man. He could be difficult, demanding, and ruthless. He was not a perfect human being. But he was a visionary in the truest sense of the word. He saw the future before it arrived, and he willed it into existence. From an unwanted baby to the founder of the most valuable company on earth, his story is the ultimate testament to the power of thinking different. The devices in our pockets today are echoes of his voice, reminders that while technology changes, the human desire for connection, beauty, and magic remains eternal.